Before the lights, before the applause, before you knew my name, there is a woman sitting in her car in a parking lot right now. Engine off, keys still in her hand, and she cannot make herself walk into that house. There is a man staring at his phone at 2 in the morning, thumb hovering over a name he swore he would never text again. There is someone reading these words who just felt their chest tighten, who just felt something old and buried lift its head and look around. I know you, not your name, not your face, but I know the shape of what lives inside you, because I have spent my whole life walking through the cellars of the human soul with a lantern, and I have seen this particular room 1,000 times. It is the room where the most loving people on earth go to be slowly, quietly consumed. It is the room where the empath, the one who feels everything, who absorbs the pain of others as though it were her own, mistakes the fire for warmth again and again until there is nothing left of her but ash and the memory of heat. Tonight I am not going to comfort you. Comfort is what you have been giving away for free your entire life. And look where it has gotten you. Tonight I am going to tell you the truth about the loop you are trapped in, and then I am going to hand you 7 days, 7 doors through which you can walk out. So sit still, breathe, and listen, because the next 40 seconds may be the only 40 seconds of honesty you receive this year. I am not going to ask you to trust me. Trust has been used against you too many times for that word to mean anything on the first breath of a stranger's voice. I am only going to ask you to stay a little longer than is comfortable, because everything that has ever healed you in this life has arrived exactly at the point where you wanted to look away. Let me tell you what nobody has told you. The bond that will not let you go is not love. It was never love. It is a pattern older than your relationship, older than your marriage, older than the friendship that hollowed you out. A pattern stitched into your psyche in childhood, in the years before you had language, when you first learned that love had to be earned through suffering, that affection arrived only after you had made yourself smaller, quieter, more useful, more forgiving than any child should ever have to be. You call it loyalty. You call it compassion. You call it, I just can't give up on people. But underneath those noble words is a wound, and that wound has a voice, and that voice has been directing your life from the shadows for longer than you know. I have listened to hundreds of souls describe this same architecture in 100 different accents, 100 different centuries of custom and circumstance, and the shape never changes. A person of great feeling, an empath, though we did not always call it that, meets a person of great need, great charm, or great cruelty, sometimes all three at once. The empath feels the wound beneath the cruelty before she feels the cruelty itself. She sees the frightened child hiding behind the closed fist, and something ancient in her rises up and says, I can heal this, I was made for this, and so begins the loop. Devotion, followed by depletion. Depletion, followed by a crumb of tenderness thrown back to her like a coin tossed to a beggar. That crumb, that single crumb, releases in her something so profound, so chemically and spiritually overwhelming, that she will crawl back through fire to receive another one. This is not weakness. Do not let anyone tell you this is weakness. This is the oldest hunger of the human soul, twisted and aimed at the wrong target. You have been taught to believe the problem is that you love too much. I am telling you tonight that the problem is you have never been taught to love yourself with the same ferocity you spend on strangers who wound you. Consider for a moment what it actually means to be an empath in a world that has never made room for such a nature. From your earliest years, you sensed the moods before they were spoken. You felt the tension enter a room before a single word was said, and you learned, without anyone teaching you directly, that your role was to smooth it, absorb it, make it disappear so that everyone else could remain comfortable. This is not a personality trait. This is a survival strategy forged in a household or a childhood where your own needs were, quietly and without cruelty on anyone's part necessarily, made secondary to the emotional weather of the adults around you. That child grew up, but the strategy did not retire simply because the danger passed. It followed you into every friendship, every romance, every workplace, because the unconscious does not know that the war is over. It only knows the pattern that once kept you safe, and it will keep deploying that pattern indefinitely unless you consciously, deliberately teach it otherwise. The unconscious does not forget. It does not negotiate. It does not care how many affirmations you whisper into a mirror at 7 in the morning. It only responds to what is faced, named, and integrated. Everything you refuse to look at directly, you are doomed to relive, not as punishment, but as invitation. Your psyche keeps handing you the same test, dressed in different clothing, different names, different cities, because it wants you to finally pass it. It wants you free. It has been trying to set you free the entire time, even through the pain, even through the heartbreak, even through the nights you thought would kill you. This is the great secret of suffering that so few are willing to hear. It is not meaningless. It is not random. It is the unconscious mind's most desperate letter to the conscious self, written in the only language it has left when we refuse to listen to gentler ones. I have sat across from kings and beggars, from scientists and mystics, and I will tell you that the wound at the center of the trauma bond does not discriminate by intellect or by station in life. The most brilliant mind I ever encountered was as thoroughly enslaved by this pattern as the simplest. Intelligence does not protect you from this loop because the loop is not a failure of intellect, it is a failure of integration. The intellect standing on one shore, shouting warnings across the water, while the feeling self, wounded and afraid, continues rowing steadily toward the very rocks it has been warned against 1,000 times before. Healing this requires something other than cleverness. It requires descent. So here is what we will do together. Not a program, not a checklist you forget by Thursday. A descent and then a return. 7 days, each one a door into a different chamber of yourself, each one demanding something honest from you before it will open. I will not lie to you and tell you it will be comfortable. Nothing that heals a wound this old is comfortable. But I promise you this, on the other side of these 7 days, you will not recognize the person who walked in. Every trauma bond survives on one substance alone: denial. Not denial that something is wrong. You have known something was wrong for months, perhaps years, but denial of how deep the wrongness truly runs. You have built an entire cathedral of justifications. He is stressed. She had a hard childhood too. It's not that bad. I'm probably overreacting. I provoked it. Things will be different this time. On the first day, you will tear down that cathedral, stone by stone. I want you to take a piece of paper, not your phone paper, something with weight and permanence, something you can hold. And I want you to write down, without softening a single word, exactly what has happened to you. Not what you have told your friends. Not the version you tell yourself in the shower. The real account. Every time you shrank, every time you apologized for something that was not your fault, every time you felt your stomach fall through the floor and told yourself it was nothing. This is not an exercise in self-pity. This is an exercise in seeing. The unconscious cannot be healed through vague unease. It must be confronted with specifics. A wound named is a wound that has begun, however faintly, to close. Understand something about the nature of the mind. What remains unconscious will be experienced as fate. You will call it bad luck, a cursed love life, a pattern you can't explain. But it is not fate. It is simply the unexamined material of your own psyche, playing itself out again and again on the stage of your relationships because you have refused it a hearing in the courtroom of consciousness. Today, you give it that hearing. You will feel exposed. You will feel, perhaps for the first time in years, the full weight of what you have been carrying, while smiling, while functioning, while telling everyone around you that you are fine. Let yourself feel it. Do not perform your pain even for yourself. Grief that is honestly felt moves through the body like weather. Grief that is denied calcifies into something you carry in your shoulders, your jaw, your stomach for the rest of your life. Tonight, before you sleep, I want you to say one sentence aloud, even if your voice shakes, even if you are alone in an empty room. I see what has been happening to me. That is all. You do not need to solve it tonight. You only need to stop pretending you cannot see it. The first door does not lead to freedom yet. It leads only to honesty. But honesty is the hinge on which every other door in this house will turn. Notice too how quickly the mind wants to rush past this discomfort into a solution. This is another old habit, the empath's instinct to fix rather than feel, to move immediately from pain into productivity, so the pain itself is never fully experienced. Resist that instinct today. There will be time for action. Today is only for seeing. A physician does not treat a wound she has refused to examine, and neither can you heal a pattern you have never allowed yourself to look at directly, in full light, without the merciful shadows of excuse and explanation softening its edges. Here is a truth that will unsettle you, and I offer it not to wound you further, but because I respect you too much to withhold it. The trauma bond loop is not only about the other person, it is also about the part of yourself you have refused to meet. We are, all of us, divided creatures. There is the self we show the world, polished, agreeable, endlessly understanding. And there is the self we banish into darkness because we were taught, very young, that it was unacceptable. Your anger, your rage at being used, your right to say no without explanation, your capacity to walk away and never look back. These are not flaws in you. These are simply the disowned half of your own nature, exiled so long ago that you have forgotten they belong to you at all. And here is the mechanism, the terrible and beautiful mechanism of how this exile keeps you bound. What you refuse to carry yourself, you unconsciously seek in others. The empath who has banished her own anger will be endlessly drawn to people who carry rage on the surface because some buried part of her recognizes the fire she herself is forbidden to hold. The one who has banished her own boundaries will be drawn to those who have none because they mirror back to her in exaggerated form the very thing she cannot access in herself. On the second day, I ask you to do something few people ever have the courage to do. I ask you to ask honestly, without flinching, what is it in me that this person, this pattern, this wound reflects back to me, not to excuse them, never to excuse them, but to reclaim the parts of yourself you exiled in order to survive your own beginnings. Sit somewhere quiet. Close your eyes if that helps you, and ask your own depths this question: what have I never let myself feel? What have I never let myself say? What have I never let myself want out loud without apologizing for wanting it? You may be surprised by what rises. Anger. Certainly, anger is almost always the first sentinel guarding the gate to everything else we have buried. Beneath the anger, very often, is grief. Beneath the grief, almost always, is a longing so old it predates every relationship you have ever had. The longing to be loved not for your usefulness, not for your endless capacity to absorb another's pain, but simply for existing. Do not run from what surfaces today. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the abandoned twin of everything you call your virtue, and until you welcome it home, it will keep finding other faces to wear, the faces of the very people who hurt you. There is an old and uncomfortable law of the psyche worth naming plainly here. Whatever you do not confront within yourself, you will meet as fate outside yourself. It will arrive at your door dressed as coincidence, as bad luck, as why does this keep happening to me? When in truth it is only the unconscious insisting, patiently and without malice, that you finally receive what it has been trying to hand you all along. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants to be integrated. It wants quite simply to come home. I will tell you something that may startle you. The very fire and defiance you have spent your life suppressing in the name of being agreeable is precisely the fuel you will need to walk away permanently from the loop that has held you. You have not lost your anger. You have only forgotten where you put it down. Today, go and find it. There is no more dangerous illusion in the human heart than this one. The belief that the person who wounds you holds some piece of your soul that you cannot live without. This is what a trauma bond actually is. Beneath all its psychological complexity, it is a projection, an unconscious casting outward of your own lost wholeness onto another human being who, being only human, was never able to carry that weight. You did not fall in love with a person. You fell in love with a symbol. You saw in them the parent who never fully saw you, the safety you never quite felt, the belonging you have been chasing since before you could walk. And because the unconscious does not distinguish between symbol and reality, losing them feels, quite literally, like losing a piece of your own body. This is why willpower alone cannot break a trauma bond. You are not fighting a bad habit. You are fighting a symbol carrying the weight of your entire unmet childhood. No amount of just move on will dislodge something rooted that deep. Only understanding can do that. Only seeing the projection for what it is. A story your unconscious told about a person, not the person themselves, can loosen its grip. Today I ask you to sit with the image of this person, not with hatred, not with longing, but with the cold, clear eye of an observer. Ask yourself, what did I believe they would give me? Safety? Worth? Proof that I was, at last, enough? Now ask yourself the harder question. Is this something another human being was ever capable of giving me in the first place? Or is it something I have been waiting my whole life to give to myself? This is the moment the loop begins to lose its power over you. Not when you hate them enough to leave. Hatred is simply love turned inside out and will keep you bound just as tightly. But when you finally see that what you were seeking was never theirs to give, it was yours all along, buried beneath decades of looking outward for what could only ever be found within, wrote their name today. And beneath it, write, you were never the source of what I was looking for. You were only ever the mirror. Then close the notebook. You do not need to forgive them today. You do not even need to stop missing them today. You only need to see clearly for the first time what you were actually reaching for. Understand that withdrawing a projection is not an act of coldness. It is, in truth, an act of tremendous respect for them because you finally stop demanding they be something they never were, and for yourself because you finally stop shrinking your own wholeness down to the size of what one wounded person was capable of returning to you. Every projection withdrawn is a piece of your own soul reclaimed. Do this enough times across enough relationships, and you will find one day that you no longer go looking for yourself in other people's eyes at all. You will simply know your own reflection when you see it. The mind can lie to itself with extraordinary sophistication. The body cannot. The body remembers everything the mind has been too frightened to acknowledge. Every swallowed word, every held breath, every night you lay awake rehearsing an apology for a crime you did not commit. An empath's suffering is rarely only psychological. It lives in the shoulders, curled forward as if perpetually bracing for impact. It lives in the stomach, which learns to knot itself before the phone even rings. It lives in the throat, tightened shut around 10,000 unspoken truths. On the fourth day, we turn away from analysis and toward the body itself, because healing that stays only in the mind is healing that never fully arrives. I ask you to move today, not for exercise, not for appearance, but to discharge what has been trapped in your nervous system for years. Walk until your breath changes. Stretch until you feel the places that ache with old tension. If tears come, and they may come suddenly and without warning, do not stop them. The body has been asking for release far longer than you have been willing to grant it. Notice, as you move through this day, every place your body still performs the old habits of the loop, the way you check your phone with dread, the way your shoulders rise, the moment a certain name crosses your mind, the way your breath shortens when you imagine setting a boundary. These are not character flaws. They are conditioned responses carved into your nervous system by repetition. And like any conditioned response, they can be unlearned through new repetition, through choosing again and again the opposite of the old collapse. Eat something today with attention rather than distraction. Sleep if you can, without the phone within reach. These sound like small things. They are not small things. They are the body's declaration that it, too, deserves to be tended rather than merely used as a vessel for everyone else's needs. You cannot think your way out of a nervous system trained for hypervigilance. You must, quite literally, teach your body a different way to exist in the world. One breath, one walk, one full night of rest at a time. There is a reason the oldest healing traditions in every corner of the world return again and again to the body, to breath, to movement, to touch, to the simple discipline of rest. The psyche does not live only in thought. It lives in tissue, in posture, in the tightness behind your eyes at the end of a long day. Treat your body today as you would treat a frightened animal that has finally been brought somewhere safe, with patience, with gentleness, with no demand that it perform its recovery on any timeline but its own. Now we arrive at the day most feared and most necessary. Every empath trapped in a trauma bond loop shares one defining wound: the belief that setting a boundary is an act of cruelty. You have spent your life believing that love means limitless access, that saying no will break something irreparable, that your worth is measured by how much you are willing to endure without complaint. I tell you plainly, a boundary is not cruelty. A boundary is the first sentence in the long overdue autobiography of your own worth. Today, I ask you to identify one boundary you have never had the courage to set with this person or with the pattern this person represents, and I ask you to set it, not perfectly, not eloquently, simply honestly. It may be as small as not answering a message the moment it arrives. It may be as large as ending a conversation that has crossed a line you have allowed to be crossed 1,000 times before. You will feel, in the moment you do this, an almost unbearable wave of guilt. This is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. This is the old pattern, the old training, protesting its own dismantling. Guilt, in this context, is not the voice of your conscience. It is the voice of a conditioning that once kept a frightened child safe by making her endlessly agreeable, and that conditioning does not surrender its territory without a fight. Let the guilt come. Do not obey it. Understand something essential about architecture of the soul. Those who cannot tolerate solitude will always mistake any peace for punishment. If the person on the other side of your new boundary reacts with rage, with guilt, with sudden desperate tenderness designed to pull you back into the loop, you are not witnessing proof that you were wrong to set the boundary. You are witnessing proof of exactly why the boundary was necessary in the first place. A boundary is not a wall built to keep love out. It is a doorway built to decide, consciously, who is allowed to walk through. For the first time in longer than you can remember, today you are the one holding the key. Pay close attention in the hours after you set this boundary to how differently your body feels compared to every previous time you gave in. There will be fear, yes, but underneath the fear, if you listen closely, there will also be something you may not recognize at first because it has been absent for so long. A quiet, steady dignity. That feeling is not a small thing. That feeling is the sound of your own foundation being laid, stone by stone, beneath a life that finally belongs to you. There is a grief that no one prepares you for, and it is this: the grief of mourning something that was never quite what you believed it to be. You are not only grieving a person today, you are grieving the future you built in your imagination, the version of them that only ever fully existed in your hope, in your capacity to see potential where there was only pattern, in your endless willingness to love the promise of someone rather than the reality standing in front of you. This grief is real, even though its object was, in part, illusion. Do not let anyone tell you it is foolish to mourn a fantasy. The fantasy carried real love inside it. Your love offered in good faith, offered with your whole undivided heart. That love was never wasted, even though it was misplaced. Every ounce of devotion you gave was genuine. It simply arrived at the wrong address. Today, allow yourself to fully grieve, not the loop, not the chaos, not the crumbs, but the sincere hope you carried that this time would be different. Let yourself cry for the version of the story you wanted so badly to be true. This is not weakness. This is the soul completing a cycle it was never permitted to complete before, because you were always too busy managing the crisis to ever properly mourn the loss beneath it. There is an old and simple wisdom in every tradition of healing. What is not grieved is not released. It simply goes underground, waiting, and resurfaces later in disguise, in the next relationship, the next friendship, the next version of the same loop, wearing a different face. Grieve fully today so you do not have to grieve this same wound again in 5 years, wearing someone else's name. By nightfall, something in you will feel lighter, not because the pain is gone, but because it has finally been allowed to move through you, instead of being permanently lodged inside you. Grief of this kind does not arrive on a schedule, and it will not politely finish itself by the time this day ends. That is not the goal. The goal is only to stop damming the river, to let what wants to move through you finally move, rather than standing guard over it the way you have stood guard over so many things for so many other people for so long. Let today be the day you finally stand guard over nothing but your own healing. And now we arrive at the final door, the one all the others have been quietly leading you toward. On the seventh day, we do not focus on what was lost. We focus on what is being recovered, because that is what this entire process has truly been. Not an escape, a homecoming. The great work of every human life is not the pursuit of happiness, whatever that word has come to mean in a world addicted to comfort. The great work is the slow, often painful process of becoming whole, of gathering back every disowned piece of yourself that you scattered across other people in the desperate hope that they would hold it safely for you. Your anger, your voice, your worth, your right to rest without earning it, your right to be loved without performing for it. Today, I ask you to write a different letter than the one you wrote on the first day. Not an account of what happened to you, but a declaration of what you are choosing now. Write to yourself as you would write to someone you deeply, unconditionally loved, because that is at last what you are learning to become, not the endless giver, not the healer of other people's wounds at the expense of your own, but a whole and sovereign human being who happens to also, when she chooses, offer compassion to others from a place of abundance rather than depletion. This does not mean you will stop being an empath. That gift, and it is a gift, however heavily it has weighed on you, is not something to be surgically removed. It is something to be protected, honored, and finally placed in service of a life that also honors you. The empath who has done this work does not become hard. She becomes discerning. She still feels the pain of the world, but she no longer mistakes every wounded person who crosses her path for her responsibility to fix. You were never meant to be a vessel that others empty and discard. You were meant to be a source, deep, self-replenishing, chosen freely by those worthy of what you offer, never extracted by those who are not. The loop that held you was never proof of your weakness. It was proof of the depth of your capacity to love. That capacity was never the problem. It was simply, for too long, aimed in the wrong direction, outward, always outward, never once turned toward the person who needed it most. Turn it toward yourself now, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, because readiness is a feeling that arrives after the courage, never before it. Turn it toward yourself today, in this moment, as you finish listening to these words. Understand, too, that this work does not end when the seventh day ends. Wholeness is not a destination you arrive at and then rest inside forever. It is a practice, a returning, a daily choosing of yourself over the old familiar comfort of self-abandonment. There will be days, weeks even, when the old pattern calls to you with a voice that sounds almost exactly like love. You will feel the pull to answer it. When that day comes, remember these 7 doors. Remember that you have already walked through them once, and a door that has been opened once can always be opened again, more easily each time, until one day you find you are no longer walking through it out of desperation, but simply out of habit. The habit, at last, of choosing yourself. I told you at the beginning that I would not comfort you, and I have kept that promise because comfort was never what you needed from me. What you needed was the truth spoken plainly by someone who has spent an entire life descending into the darkest rooms of the human psyche and returning each time with the same discovery that within every wound lies the exact shape of the medicine required to heal it. You did not survive everything you have survived so that you could remain trapped in a loop written by your wounds instead of your wholeness. You survived it because some part of you, buried beneath the exhaustion, beneath the heartbreak, beneath every crumb of affection you mistook for a feast, has always known that you were meant for more than this. That part of you is still here. It has been here the entire time, waiting patiently through every relapse, every return, every moment you told yourself you would never go back and then went back anyway. It has never once judged you for the loop. It has only ever waited for you to be ready to walk through these 7 doors. You have walked through them now. Somewhere ahead of you, though you cannot see it yet, there is a version of your life in which this entire ordeal becomes not a scar you hide, but a depth you carry with quiet authority. The kind of depth that draws people not because you are useful to them, but because you have become, through fire, someone genuinely whole. That is not a fantasy. That is simply what becomes possible on the far side of the work you have done this week. It is not owed to you by fate. It is built, door by door, exactly as you have just built it. Go and live like someone who finally knows her own worth was never something to be earned from another person's hands. It was yours from the very beginning. It was only ever waiting for you to come home and claim it.